In October 1943, there was a tactic that United States Army Air Force commanders desperately wanted buried. It was a blatant violation of official doctrine, but it saved over 2,000 American bomber crews who, by every statistical measure, should have been dead. For years, this story stayed locked away in classified files, and when you discover why commanders wanted this kept quiet, you'll understand an uncomfortable truth about how real innovation actually happens in war. The death rate for B-17 bomber crews over Europe in 1943 was absolutely catastrophic. On some missions, 50% of the crews sent out just didn't come back. 50%. Think about that. You're sitting in a briefing room with 10 crews that morning, and only 5 of them walk out of the hangar at dinner time. The numbers got so grim that commanders actually stopped telling people how bad it was. They knew morale would completely tank. And for certain positions, things were even worse, way worse. Waist gunners, standing on the sides of the B-17 fuselage completely exposed, had a survival rate of just 30% on rough missions. The ball turret gunner was in the worst spot, hanging in a plexiglass bubble under the plane's belly. If the landing gear got hit and wouldn't retract, that gunner was done. The tail gunner sat isolated at the back, alone with the Messerschmitts coming at him from behind. The Schweinfurt raids in August and October 1943 showed you exactly what that carnage looked like. The second mission on October 14th. The 8th Air Force lost 60 bombers that day, 60 B-17 flying fortresses, 10 men each. 600 airmen flew out that morning, 600 didn't come home. And that was just one day, one mission. October 1943 got a name, Black Week. In 7 days, the 8th Air Force lost 148 heavy bombers. Ground crews stopped even putting names on the fuselages. The planes were dying faster than they could paint them. Chaplains were holding memorial services constantly. After a while, they just stopped reading individual names and started saying, "For our fallen comrades this week." The official explanation from command was crystal clear. Crews weren't holding formation tight enough. The Army Air Force doctrine on this was non-negotiable. All bombers had to fly in locked-in box formations, just 150 to 200 feet apart. The logic made sense on paper. Pack them tight, and you get a concentrated wall of firepower. Full 360 degrees of 50 caliber machine guns. A solid wall of lead that nothing could get through. That was the theory. The reality was completely different. But the tight box had a fatal weakness that German fighter pilots saw immediately and exploited brutally. Flying in those rigid lockstep patterns made bombers sitting ducks. The experienced Focke-Wulf 190 and Messerschmitt 109 pilots could track you. The Germans knew exactly where you'd be at any second. They could calculate the lead, set up the perfect attack angle, and put cannon fire right through your wing route. And here's the killer. That tight formation meant you had to fly level and straight. No weaving, no climbing or diving. You had to hold that line. Command was adamant about this because they thought if anybody broke ranks, the Germans would pour through the gaps. So that's what you did. You flew straight and level, even when fighters were swarming you. You were basically strapped to a target range, watching them set up the perfect shot. Here's what it actually looked like. Lieutenant Robert Hansen, a B-17 pilot with the 303rd Bomb Group, wrote about a typical fighter pass in his diary from November 19, 1943. 4 FW-190s came at them from ahead and above, doing 500 mph closing speed. Hansen's nose gunner started shooting at 3. Iwo 0 feet out, but the fighters just drove right through the fire. At 650 feet, they opened up with their 20mm cannons. He watched the plane to his left, 50 feet over, take cannon fire in engine number 2. The engine just exploded. Shrapnel tore through the fuselage. The B-17 started spinning left, straight into Hansen's path. Without thinking, he yanked the stick right to get out of the way. That's when his squadron commander, flying behind them, keyed the radio. "Hansen, get back in formation, now!" That was a direct order. Breaking formation meant court-martial, but the B-17 next to him was going down in flames with 10 guys in it. In 2 seconds, he had to pick, follow orders and possibly crash, or break away and face charges when he got home. That was the choice every crew faced every single mission. Doctrine said you had to fly like robots, completely rigid, no flexibility. but every instinct told you to maneuver, to dodge, to fight back in a way that actually kept you alive. Thousands of men died caught between those two forces. Take Michael Donovan. He was a waist gunner on the Lucky Strike. A German 20mm cannon shell ripped through the fuselage during a fighter pass. Donovan was 22 years old, with a fiancée back home. 3 days later, she got a telegram that started, "The War Department deeply regrets to inform you," or James Chen. He was a navigator on the Memphis Belle II, not the original Memphis Belle, but a plane that borrowed the name. Killed by fighter fire before his crew even finished their 5th mission. Chen had a math degree from Berkeley. He was going to be a professor after the war. Instead, he bled out at 30,000 feet over Germany on the frozen floor of a bomber. They weren't statistics, they were real men, with names, with families, with futures they planned. And they were dying not because the enemy was invincible, but because doctrine made them predictable, made them sitting ducks, made them helpless. But then something weird started happening in late 1943. Certain crews kept coming back. Guys who should have been dead according to the odds were walking off the ramps over and over. Crews with 10, 15, even 20 missions under their belt, when the average B-17 crew lasted 5 or 6 before getting shot down. Operations officers started digging into the mission reports, and the coded language was weird. Unauthorized maneuvers during fighter engagement. Questionable formation adherence, however, all personnel returned. Crew violated protocol investigation to follow. Command was confused. The crews that followed the rulebook perfectly, dying. The crews breaking orders, surviving. Something didn't add up. Then, in December 1943, General Curtis LeMay, commander of the 3rd Air Division, got a report that made him stop and read it twice. 3 squadrons flying the same routes, hitting the same targets, facing the same German fighters. One squadron had 52% losses, another had 19%. You don't get a gap like that from luck. Something was happening that nobody was officially talking about. LeMay called in the intelligence guys and told them to interrogate the crews that kept coming back. At first, the pilots dodged. They knew what they'd done. Admitting it meant court-martial. So they said, "Just luck, sir," or "better marksmanship," or "God was with us." But when the interrogators pushed harder and promised there'd be no charges, the story came out. The surviving crews were doing something that every training manual, every order from command, every pre-flight briefing said you absolutely could not do. They were breaking formation intentionally. What these crews were doing broke every rule in the Air Force book. And when command finally found out what was really happening, it would shake them up. Because what they were facing wasn't just a tactical issue. It was the reality that official doctrine was killing thousands of men who could have been saved. The intelligence officers at 8th Air Force were going through late 1943 mission reports and seeing something impossible. Certain groups had survival rates that didn't match the odds at all. Bomb groups that should have been wiped out were coming home mostly intact. When command asked how, the answer was always unauthorized maneuvers. Take Captain Robert Morgan from the 91st. In December 1943 over Braunschweig, his formation got hit by 27 FW-190s. Doctrine said, "Stay tight, fly level, rely on the overlapping guns." Morgan didn't follow the script. He wasn't panicking, he was thinking. In the few seconds before that first 190 started firing, Morgan watched the German pilot adjust his sight. The fighter was setting up the perfect lead shot, betting that the bomber would keep flying straight. Morgan pulled the stick left, then right, a smooth S-weave, just enough to break the solution. The 1-90 zipped past 150 feet away clean miss. 7 of Morgan's 9 B-17s made it back that day. The other formations in the group that stuck to the book lost 4 aircraft each on average. The difference between Morgan's crew breaking the rules and everybody else following orders, 40%. And Morgan should have been facing court-martial for it. This wasn't official doctrine. It wasn't in the manual. But it was spreading through every bomber base like a secret weapon. The trick was dead simple. Open up the spacing and weave when the fighters came. Instead of 150 feet apart, experienced crews flew 300, 600 feet apart. And when the enemy made a pass, instead of holding a straight line to the guns, they'd throw the bomber into an S-turn. Here's how First Lieutenant James Stewart from the 303rd described it in his diary on January 11, 1944. "We opened up the spacing to about 500 feet. When the 109s came in from the front, we did coordinated S-turns, not huge swings, just enough to mess up their aiming calculations. The German gunners couldn't track fast enough. Here's why that worked. German fighters spent years learning deflection shooting, speed, angle, distance. They'd calculate it all perfectly for a bomber flying straight, but a plane weaving side to side added a variable they couldn't figure out in the 3 seconds they had. Their math broke down. Tracer fire went high, low, or behind. Plus there was a bonus. With more spacing, the gunners could actually see." Tech Sergeant Michael O'Brien was a waist gunner with the 381st, and after one mission he wrote, "With more room between us and the other plane, I could follow the 190s the whole time. I got off longer bursts instead of quick snapshots, got 2 confirmed." And this kept happening over and over again. January 7, 1944, Ludwigshafen. A 91st Group formation using the new spacing and weaving tactics got jumped by 32 German fighters. Lost 0 bombers, exactly 2 weeks before. Same route, same group, flying by the book. 6 B-17s didn't come back. January 11th, same month, Oschersleben. The 303rd decided to go all in on the tactic at squadron level. 40-plus 109s came at them during the bomb run, 8% losses. The official Air Force rate for that same mission? 23%. February 20th, 1944, big week. Crews using this forbidden approach had survival rates that were 30–40% better than crews that followed doctrine. The numbers didn't lie. The tactic worked. And Luftwaffe fighter pilots were noticing. Even the Germans saw it happening. After he got shot down and captured in March 1944, a German major named Franz Stiegler, 28, confirmed kills was being interrogated. When they asked him about American tactics, he said, "Early in 1944, some of your groups changed how they flew. Wider gaps between planes, weaving when we attacked, made deflection shooting almost useless. We had to switch to rear attacks from underneath, but the tail gunner had time to react." The enemy was admitting it worked. Not only did the tactic work, it was actually changing the fight. But here's the problem. It was absolutely forbidden. Command wasn't having it. Colonel Robert Travis, running the 41st Combat Wing, sent down an order on January 15, 1944. All bombers will stay in standard formation spacing. Any unauthorized evasive maneuvers during bomb runs get you disciplinary charges. Formation discipline is not up for discussion. So pilots were stuck. Follow orders and probably die, or break orders and live. A future test pilot named Chuck Yeager, he was a B-17 co-pilot then before they moved him to fighters, said it straight, "You saw the numbers. You knew weaving kept you alive. But your commanding officer says he'll court-martial you if you do it. So you pick, your career or your crew." Most picked their crew. Take Lieutenant Thomas Murphy from the 306th. After a mission over Stuttgart on March 6, 1944, his commander called him in. Murphy's B-17 came back without a scratch. The other planes looked like they'd been through a shredder. The CO wanted answers. Murphy straight up told him, "I weaved, sir, and I'm doing it again. My crew's going home." They reprimanded him. But on the next mission, Murphy did exactly the same thing. His crew flew 35 missions and lost nobody. The word spread fast. Veterans didn't go through official channels to teach this stuff. They taught rookies directly. Bill Lawley was a top turret gunner. He said, "The night before your first mission, the experienced guys pull you aside. They tell you to forget what they taught you in school. They show you the real spacing, when to weave, how to stay coordinated with your wingman. It wasn't in any manual, but that's how you stayed alive." And across every 8th Air Force base, something was growing. Pilots were comparing spacing techniques. Gunners were talking about how much better they could see with more room. Navigators were marking on their maps which routes the Germans favored and where you'd really need to weave, and the results continued to accumulate. The 91st started 1944 with 19% losses per mission. By March, once everyone was unofficially using the new tactics, that dropped to 11%. That's a 40% cut in casualties. The 303rd saw it too. The 381st, the 379th, every group had the same story. The crews that broke the rules came home. The crews that followed the manual got killed. And now command couldn't pretend they didn't notice. General Curtis LeMay ran the 3rd Air Division, and he wasn't the kind of guy who bent rules, but even he couldn't argue with numbers. In February 1944, he sat in on a command meeting and looked at the January reports. The formations that broke spacing rules consistently lower losses, but saying yes to that out loud meant admitting the doctrine was killing guys. That enlisted pilots figured out something the generals missed. That breaking orders was saving lives. That's a hard thing for the military to swallow. But across all the bases in England, hundreds of crews just kept flying the forbidden tactic anyway. More pilots used the spacing. More gunners got better angles on the fighters. More families got returned safely telegrams instead of missing in action. Innovation was bubbling up from the ground, and no general's order was going to shut it down. By early 1944, hundreds of crews were quietly using this forbidden approach. Mechanics were talking about it between hangars in low voices. Veterans told new pilots, "We'll show you how to actually survive this." What started with one crew improvising had become an underground movement spreading through dozens of bomb groups, and the squadron commanders were in an impossible position. Their casualty numbers were dropping fast, but their pilots were breaking orders. In the mission reports, operations guys started seeing a weird pattern. The groups that weren't following orders had the fewest losses. The groups that stuck to the doctrine got torn apart. The groups doing the forbidden weaving came back nearly intact. The truth was undeniable, but acknowledging it meant admitting that official doctrine was killing Americans. At the bases, captains were pulling new pilots aside and saying, "The manual says 150 feet apart. Forget that. When the 109s come, go to 500 feet and weave. Your tail gunner can see better. The German can't get a bead on a moving target. You'll come home." "But what if they find out?" a new guy asked. "They already know," the veteran said. "They just haven't decided what to do about it yet." And he was right. Back at headquarters, the intelligence guys were looking at the numbers with this sick feeling. It was obvious. The groups that flew by the book, 8 to 12% losses per mission. The groups where crews broke the rules, 4 to 7%. That's a 30–40% drop in casualties. This wasn't random variation. This was proof that the official doctrine was wrong, and it was killing American airmen. Spring 1944. A colonel walked into a general's office with 2 files. He put them on the desk. "Sir, we've got a situation. Crews that break the rules are surviving. Crews that follow orders are dying." The room just went quiet. The generals who'd written the formation doctrine years ago were staring at data that said they were wrong. Admitting the pilots were right meant admitting command was wrong. That soldiers had died because of orders that should never have been given. But they couldn't ignore the facts. Thousands of B-17 crews were flying monthly. If they kept the old doctrine, hundreds would die for nothing. If they approved what the pilots were already doing, thousands would live. So in April 1944, they released a bulletin. Tactical flexibility in combat formations during enemy fighter encounters. It didn't say the pilots figured this out on their own. It didn't say command had been threatening court-martial for exactly this tactic just months before. It just made legal what guys were already risking their careers to do. Training bases in the States got new manuals. Now official doctrine taught combat spacing and weaving, the tactic that could have gotten you court-martialed in 1943. Standard operating procedure in 1944. The veteran crews saw the bitter joke. A bombardier said it. Takes 6 months of getting killed for the brass to admit the frontline guys were right all along. How many men died doing suicide formations while command acted like they had no idea there was a better way? After the war, the numbers got calculated. By adopting the combat spacing and weaving tactics officially from spring 1944 until the end of the war, the Air Force saved between 0 and 500 airmen. 20,000 men who should have been dead came home instead. 2,000 crews, 10 men each, 20,000 sons and brothers and fathers who made it because some pilots broke orders and some generals finally admitted they'd been wrong. There was Robert Chen, waist gunner with the 303rd. He flew 28 missions using the new tactics. On his 15th over Berlin, 109s came at his formation. His pilot opened it up and started weaving. Chen tracked a fighter through his sight and watched the tracers rip through it. The fighter fell. The German pilot couldn't get a lead on a plane that was moving. Chen came home after the war, settled in San Francisco, became a teacher. He had 3 kids and 7 grandkids. They exist because a pilot used a tactic that could have gotten him a court-martial the year before. Take that story and multiply it by 2,000. That's what we're talking about, not abstract numbers, families, college degrees, grandchildren. Entire lives and futures because pilots refused to follow an order that was killing them. But after the war, the story got buried. The official Air Force write-ups mentioned the tactical changes, but didn't talk much about where they came from. No mention that the pilots invented it, working in active combat, not some general sitting in a safe office. It wasn't until the 60s and 70s when historians really dug into what happened. They found the April 1944 bulletin. They found the 1943 mission reports full of unauthorized maneuvers. They found letters where crews talked about how the veterans secretly showed them the trick. They found the statistical proof that casualties dropped, and they found the uncomfortable part. The 8th Air Force leadership actively suppressed a tactic that saved lives because admitting to it meant admitting the doctrine was wrong. Soldiers died not because nobody knew the answer, but because command didn't want to acknowledge that frontline pilots figured out something the generals missed. But something else happened. The combat spacing and weaving tactics didn't just save lives in 1944, they changed how the whole Air Force trained after the war. During the Cold War, pilot training shifted from rigid formations to flexible formations that adapted to actual combat. What a bunch of desperate B-17 crews improvised in 1943 became the foundation of modern Air Force tactics. You see it in every flight manual today, adaptability, instead of blind obedience. But there's no ticker tape parade in this story. The pilots who first broke ranks to save their crews didn't get medals. No official award for successfully violated orders with lethal results. No ceremony naming the guys who risked court-martial to prove the brass was wrong. They got recognition decades later. In history books, in academic papers, but it came after a lot of the pioneering pilots were gone, or at least a lot of time had passed. Here's the uncomfortable part of this story. The military was supposed to protect American soldiers, and it did the opposite. It resisted the innovation that would have saved them. Not because anyone was evil, but because the institution couldn't admit it was wrong, couldn't accept that enlisted pilots figured out something generals missed, couldn't get past the need to maintain authority. And this isn't just military history. It's a pattern we see everywhere. When institutions care more about preserving doctrine than looking at actual evidence, people suffer. When the hierarchy blocks innovation from people on the front lines, opportunities get wasted. When authority punishes people for questioning flawed rules, everything slows down. Those B-17 pilots in 1943 understood something the brass didn't. Doctrine is supposed to serve reality, not the other way around. When what you're experiencing contradicts what they taught you in school, experience wins. When staying alive means breaking the rules, then the rules are broken. 2,000 airmen came home because men refused to die for a doctrine. This is the forbidden tactic commanders buried for years, not because it didn't work, because it worked too well. It proved the hierarchy was wrong and nobody wanted that story out. Think about that. The biggest innovations don't come from generals in air-conditioned offices. They come from soldiers under fire, from guys who actually saw the problem and had to fix it right then. The institutions resist recognizing this kind of innovation the hardest. They always do. Those pilots who ignored orders to save their crews literally rewrote the rules of air combat. The story they lived got locked away in classified files for decades, proof that even when innovation is staring leadership in the face, institutions find ways to ignore it. So here's the question. How many other forbidden tactics changed history? How many other life-saving ideas got suppressed before anyone finally admitted they were right? If this history fascinates you, hit like. Subscribe if you want more stories about World War II history that people in power wanted to keep buried. Because the actual history, the real story, that's not always in the official books. Sometimes the most important stuff is the part that was deliberately left out.